The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
There are many reasons why you might invest in a Fisher Funds managed fund, whether it's for the grandkids, your retirement, or that investment property. Whatever your reason, a managed fund is a smart and flexible way to help you achieve your ambitions. Take the first step. Visit our website or call us to speak with an expert advisor today. Fisher Funds Management Limited is the issuer of Fisher Funds Managed Funds. A product disclosure statement for the scheme can be found at fisherfunds.co.nz.
Life is full of things to manage. Your work, your family, your plans, and your treatment. Consider Kesimpta, ofatumumab 20 milligram injection. You can take it yourself from the comfort of home. If you're ready for something different, ask your healthcare provider about Kesimpta and check out the details at kesimpta.com. Brought to you by Novartis Pharmaceuticals Corporation.
No mai hoki mai ki the fold, imahine, kodangri, tōku ingoa. My guest today, Glenn Kine, back from the US.
Morning, Duncan. Good to be back. Kind of good to be back. Glad to be here with you, of course. But part of me still wishing to be on holiday.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and also that beautiful thing you have when you're in a much bigger media market of just kind of gorging on all of the choice that's available to you.
And a crazy time to observe media in the US right now ahead of the election. It's incredible.
Yeah, I can only imagine. We'll talk a bit about that towards the end, but. What we're going to discuss today is a pair of stories which have come out over the weekend and that speak a bit to broader themes and challenges of their respective organisations. The first was a Shane Curry scoop based on a leaked email about the next round of cuts at TVNZ, and the second, which is from Newsroom, Tim Murphy and Mark Jennings writing about a traffic surge at RNZ and the sort of, I guess, how commercial organisations might respond to that, which I've got some sort of thoughts on what's driving that and what it means for RNZ. We'll talk a bit about a couple of new shows that are running in the 7:30pm Sunday slot, which is the 7 p.m. Sunday slot, which is kind of basically as good as it gets from a kind of an audience scale perspective. Some changes to YouTube's connected TV approach, which I think are actually bigger than all these stories.
Yeah,
and finally, we'll touch on Luke Combs playing 2 Eden Parks as a sort of a window into country's continued rise. But we'll start off with this email from that emerged over the weekend. Shane Curry reporting on a range of options being kind of considered to try and, I mean, they've got to find 30 million in savings, which is obviously a pretty significant sum, and where they're looking at that, and there's a line in the email that's basically about content and websites that aren't profitable. Now, TVNZ doesn't run a vast array of websites. It's got TVNZ Plus, which is a sort of a website, but also an app, and is clearly the future of the business. But it's also got onenews.co.nz, which is essentially a sort of a similar service to staff to RNZ. But they have put a lot of resource into it lately. Honestly, it's become a much better, more considered product. It's got a lot of kind of long-form writing, but according to their annual report, it's still a relatively small sum of money. And I guess the bigger thing is how do they imagine that number will grow commensurate to that growth in cost? Yeah, I just wondered if you'd sort of read the story and what your sort of perception of it was.
I read that story last night. A couple of thoughts came to mind. One, I think TVNZ still need to do a job to really communicate the longer-term strategy of that organisation and where it's heading. It's very clear, of course, that traditional linear is in sort of systemic structural decline now, and they see the future obviously around TVNZ Plus, but how are they going to transition that business? $1 in the digital world is not worth $1 in the linear world. So how are they going to bridge some of these issues, and how are the staff going to be communicated with along some of these things to truly understand what that journey looks like? On the news front specifically, just sort of harking back a little bit, we obviously newshub.co.nz back in the day, pre-closure, regularly held the number 3 spot in terms of digital publishers. Wasn't making, a huge sum of money, but it regularly held that spot and regularly bet TVNZ. And I'm pretty sure TVNZ would have invested a whole bunch more money in there and not necessarily got the return. So I think, an objective assessment would be that's a tough business for them to be in to make work and to get an economic return. And I just wonder, with all of these announcements around cost savings, when are we going to see and when are we going to hear what changes need to be made to the news operation? Because the economics that, the powerhouse of news that has driven TVNZ1 and driven overall TVNZ, they are starting to falter and fall away.
I mean, the thing that's, and that kind of naturally begs a few questions, which we'll get to. Regarding onenews.co.nz, the thing that's, I guess, I wonder about in terms of the strategy is that they've moved into creating more and better. I think it's hard to argue that they haven't significantly improved the quality of the product, text-based journalism. And, you've seen some of their sort of star reporters, the likes of John Campbell, Scotty Stevenson, writing more and longer. But, they've hired some fantastic editors and writers, and it's sort of step changed the feel of the content. But I think the hard thing is that TVNZ has been a volume business, and it's been driven purely by advertising and by kind of scale advertising across linear and now increasingly across TVNZ Plus. Long form is notoriously hard to pay for, and if your only model is largely display-based advertising, they don't have any reader revenue. Reader revenue is really the only thing that has ever paid for long form anywhere in the world. So I can kind of understand that unless they plan to launch a paywall product, and that would inevitably be, now you're in true competition with the Herald and stuff and ODT, spin-off, you name it. It's quite a crowded market. That I just wonder how that will pay for itself. And I guess the bigger thing is, I think for all these different companies, you came in a particular way by being outstanding at video news. Trying to become great at something else is without a revenue stream associated with it, like Stuff has, is just a really difficult ask.
I think that's the core issue. I mean, there's two things here. One, editorially, how do you stand out in a crowded and small market with two very large, arguably 3 large players? And I'm not sure, even though TVNZ have been improving that, I'm not sure it's clear what their editorial position is as opposed to their competitor set. Secondly, you're spot on. And I can tell you firsthand from experience, it is a challenge to run a unified newsroom and a unified workflow when the core of your business model is, output of video news product on a bulletin, whether it be 6 p.m. or throughout the day. And then trying to integrate digital teams in and around that is incredibly difficult. And I don't think anyone really around the world has solved that. And I would posit that one of the things that TVNZ potentially need to think about is actually, rather than onenews.co.nz being something that requires a lot of attention, how do they think about doing what they do well in video news and translating that into a TVNZ Plus environment? How do they think differently? So take the core of what they do, and they do it very, very well, expand it into the future environment and where they know they can get a stronger bang for a buck. The economics are probably going to be better. The ROI in terms of the CPMs are going to be better. The eyeballs are going to be there as they get the benefit from driving promotion of TVNZ Plus.
It's interesting, right? Like, and if you don't look at what TVNZ has right now in terms of infrastructure and said, let's just imagine what it could be, part of me thinks that, well, actually, could you move into a sort of a rolling 24-hour kind of, fast channel effectively, free ad-supported television, try and get your news team making enough in terms of commentary-based shows that are almost like, not much more production value than radio, but with multiple cameras and some sort of VTs dropped in, and have onenews.co.nz be the place that you go to sort of just check in on the news, and versus trying to run a text-based news operation alongside a video-based news operation. Obviously you'll be much more familiar with the economics of that, but I just sort of wonder in terms of what the core competency of the newsroom is, what it's set up to do and likes to do, whether that might be, ultimately and painfully a more rational place to put energy, especially given that would sit really nicely on TVNZ Plus as well as, using linear, as well as kind of potentially providing a different way of using the One News kind of audience, because I guess I don't see that there is I'm not aware of many organisations around the world that have kind of where video is their core, where they've been able to build a successful, well-monetized text-based operation to the size.
The ones that I'm aware of, I think about CBS in the US and CNN, for example, which I'm reasonably familiar with. They moved the other way, actually. They went down the fast channel strategy. So CNN now have a fast channel in different territories. And 24/7 fast does not need to mean 24/7 live television. It's curated. It's there for the news junkies that want to receive their news in video form, not text form. And, for me, being a news junkie just in the US, I was craving watching a lot of those channels and getting the news of the day around what was happening in the US and enjoyed it, immensely. So I think there's a space for it in the market, and I think there's possibly, first mover advantages by someone who's going to crack that. Makes a lot of sense for me, for TVNZ to move into that direction.
And then at least they're selling, even from their sales team's perspective, they're just trying to sell more of the same units and just put them in different places. Let's move on to RNZ, and then ultimately I think there might be a way to connect these two stories up afterwards. So Mike Jennings and Tim Murphy, the co-editors Newsroom, had a story this morning about the continued rise in RNZ audiences over the past sort of 5 or 6 years. They sort of quote from Nielsen data that shows September 2018 there were 422,000 viewers of rnz.co.nz. That rose in 21 with the COVID bounce to 877,000. It was essentially flatlined at 880 this time last year. Now it's at 1.56 million, which is, a pretty staggering number. The outside of stuff in the Herald, which are at 2 million a month, no one's really been able to move much north of 1 million. You had News Hub, One News, and RNZ all kind of stuck around there. This is the first time you've seen that. It's also, August is the first month when News Hub has been properly decommissioned. I just wonder what your sort of impressions were there.
Yeah, well, it'd be interesting actually if someone could do the work out there for us in the audience to go, has the News Hub audience actually shifted over to RNZ? Is that what's actually happened here? I don't know. I know that the commercial news organisations are probably a little concerned. That
was the thesis of the newsroom story, and it's not. It's interesting, right? Because it's Jennings and Murphy not saying they themselves are concerned, and I think they have a right to feel like their audience is a bit different. But if you're stuff in the Herald and suddenly you're seeing a competitor leaves the market, and instead of that being sprinkled amongst other commercial players, it actually goes to the non-commercial player, that you can see why that would be scary.
Oh yeah, there's money in their hills that's not been realised for those commercial players, and I guess one of the questions is, what is the driving strategy behind RNZ? Right? Is it to build a quality audience or segment of audiences that they want to engage with the editorial strategy, or Are they looking to build volume of audience? And better than anyone, Duncan, editorial strategy, whether you're trying to drive clicks or whether you're trying to drive audience engagement, they're very different strategies. And if they're trying to drive clicks, that's where the commercial broadcasters are making their money.
That's what's interesting, right? So this period between July last year and August this year, that's the period in which Mark Stevens, who was the former boss of Stuff editorially, has been in charge over there, and they've hired a bunch of former Stuff journalists. You can't argue that RNZ, the quality of the fundamental underlying journalism is not sort of stronger, and obviously they've had this sort of $25 million a year cash injection, which has helped that. The thing that I see when I look at the RNZ homepage, though, is that rather than that journalism necessarily being persistently heroed, you do see more sort of entertainment lifestyle stories. That, they've covered the Sean Combs trial or charges quite extensively, and I guess from my perspective, the public interest argument in terms of what that 25 million was for, I'm not 100% sure that it meets that. Absolutely, it has to be covered. It's just about the prominence of the coverage from the state broadcaster, because the public is interested in it. It's just, is it duplicative of what's already happening? I mean, that's one of the most covered news stories in the world, the trial of an entertainer in New York. It's about what is the function of RNZ? Is it to meet underserved audiences where they are? Is it to cover stories which aren't really plausible for the commercial media to cover, or is it to reach as big an audience as possible? These are complex questions. I'm not saying I have the answer, but it does feel like the mix is different there.
Yeah, and it's been changing for a while, right? It's been unclear to kind of put your finger on exactly what that strategy is. Maybe now's the time for us to maybe connect the dots a little on between TVNZ and RNZ and just riff on that a little bit. If you, Schumann, read and take out of that email yesterday around TVNZ that news at TVNZ requires a change, the economics aren't working the way they were. If you equally assume that RNZ are now getting more funding from the government and building a digital platform that, yes, is building numbers, but taking away from the commercial broadcast, is it time to look at the two news organisations and for us to have a different conversation and to think differently? If news, the commercial model of news is troubled around the world, does the TVNZ newsroom and the RNZ newsroom need to think differently, collaborate, potentially come together to build something that is stronger, protected and enshrined in New Zealand with a very clear editorial strategy rather than duplicating cost and infrastructure and purely taking away, commercial money from the other, news organisations? What do you think?
Look, I think there's a lot of merit in that. I mean, it's a really difficult thing, right? So you're going to have a TVNZ newsroom, which is rightly incredibly proud of its product and its history, and likewise RNZ. They do have the same kind of ultimate owner, effectively, but they have been run very differently and serving different mediums, different audiences, different news cultures. But you can kind of see that what you take away from Jodie's email is effectively that TVNZ is a commercial organisation and that everything that is not New Zealand On Air funded is effectively exposed to the kind of commercial realities of the business. And she has got no appetite, the board has no appetite for continuing to run things because they should. Essentially they have to pay their own way. And so if you're the newsroom, as much as this is a painful idea, and as much as there is a public interest in news that goes well beyond the commercial, absent a major intervention, which I don't see coming from this government, I think that if you believe that you want to kind of build out the strongest and most sustainable foundation for your news organisation, merging the two of them and having a combination of untagged government money coming through from RNZ and commercial money coming through from various outputs of it, whether it's a fast channel or the 6 p.m. news and whatever ultimately replaces that on TVNZ Plus, you can see that that might be the best way to keep the largest number of journalistic jobs and journalistic outputs available on into the future, as difficult as that conversation is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think without thinking, or at least a conversation along those lines, I can certainly see a world where TVNZ will need to continue to make that newsroom smaller over time to get the cost efficiency, to your point, Jodie, and she said no sacred cows, right? And the board will not have an appetite for a loss. And so that probably means every year reviewing that commercial model and trying to figure out how to make it work. It's not a fun place to be. And on the RNZ side, they would love, I'm sure, to have a stronger presence in video news in terms of their digital offering. Kind of just makes sense to be able to, and both, for government, this is probably the biggest question here, because they are unlikely, I think, in the current national government to have an appetite to go through this type of merger activity. However, the economics probably suggested it's the right way forward for the sector.
Yeah, and in some ways, I don't know whether this would require legislative change, but if the organisations went to this government and said, look, we think that this is the best way of delivering the maximum possible value for the current investment, I would be surprised if there was much pushback from this current government for that. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I can tell you, Paul is a big believer in collaboration.
This is Goldsmith, the minister?
No, this is Paul Thompson, the CEO.
Right, okay.
CEO.
Just wanted to make that
clear. I'm not entirely sure of Paul Goldsmith's views on this. I have some suspicions, but Paul Thompson is a big believer in collaboration in the sector to find, new ways of operating and combined benefit for parties. And, we've spoken about this before around the need for the industry to look at these opportunities. TVNZ historically have not been big on collaboration in the sector and have been well known for it. I suspect that's, needs must changing right now. And I think Jodie's been public about saying that, TVNZ need to look at these opportunities. So, look, I'd be surprised if there hadn't been a conversation happening, at least at a cursory level, to, understand it. But again, for me, all roads kind of point to that's an issue that's going to need to be solved at some point for both organisations.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on it, but really difficult situation, but equally one which, if the alternative is just every year you go out and have to point to 10-15% of your workforce that you're going to sacrifice so that you can maintain your independence, it might be the lesser of both evils.
Immerse yourself in Candy Crush Music Season. Crush the competition for a chance to win 3 epic live music experiences anywhere in the world. Discover the hottest new tracks from Toki Monster, Kimbra, and Lazewo in-game now. Now that sounds sweet. Click or tap the banner to download Candy Crush and play Music Season now. Start September 19th. Open to players 18 older above level 25 in eligible countries. Price cap value and terms apply.
Piece by piece. Revolutionary artist Pharrell Williams invites you to Piece by Piece, a first-of-its-kind Lego movie event.
What if we told my story with Lego pieces?
Let's do it. Discover what it takes to build the greatest hits with Kendrick Lamar, Jay-Z, Justin Timberlake, Pusha T, Gwen Stefani, and Snoop Dogg.
I was always a bad gangster, but you brought out the fun in me.
Hell yeah.
Piece by Piece. Get tickets now for Piece by Piece. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Directed by Morgan Neville. Only in theaters October 11th.
Just to finally a bit of a coda on this story that I think really speaks to just how far and fast we've come on this issue and just how deeply, but basically that explains where we're at. So 7 p.m. Sunday.
Prime time.
Is as prime time as it gets,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
I mean, I don't know, was that close to max audiences for...
Yeah, it's the hero night, hero time slot.
So, and historically, that was country calendar into Sunday on TVNZ. And those two, along with One News, were always amongst the 5 highest rating shows of the week.
Yep.
In 5+, country calendar was very often number 1.
Yep.
And Sunday, this flagship news product that was shut down earlier this year, because even though it only cost sort of, I think, about $2.5 million to make, and they got a lot of good works out of that. They just considered that it was uneconomic and would continue to be so, rightly or wrongly. I think it's really telling what has replaced that show and in that time slot and what is up against it on the other channel. Now, these two shows, one is a local version of the location franchise. Here, it operates under the name AA Insurance Location. That is baked into the title, the sponsor's name. I watched the first episode last week, and 5 minutes of it is, one of the people who's they're finding a house for talking about insurance, and it's to the point where you think between the title and the baked-in content and the ads which wrap around that on digital and linear, they're pretty close to funding the full cost of the show, I would say. It doesn't look like an expensive version of the format. It's nothing like the UK one where there's sort of weeks baked in. They go and look at a couple of houses together. Up against it from mid-October will be a new show called Kiwi Bank on the Ladder. Again, you've got the sponsor's name baked in. It's Brodie Kane trying to help people find a house. Not a radically different show.
Brodie Kane, by the way, she's doing incredibly well as a talent out there at the moment.
It's amazing, right? Because she sort of left, I think it was NZME, and launched her own podcast network, which has done really well and now has a tie-up with stuff. But suddenly she's everywhere. She's on Game of Two Halves. She's got this kind of primetime show coming up. So it's a vindication of an independent strategy from her. So absolutely well done. But just kind of, that does feel predictive of the future, right? Like if the new shows that are outside of the New Zealand On Air system are going to be close to, if not wholly funded by a sponsor, and you can get effectively sponsored content into the primest of prime time.
Yeah, and I think this is very reflective of where the sector is at economically. And, all broadcasters at the moment will be having constrained content budgets, but they still have a need to deliver a volume of hours out to an audience that rates it at an appropriate level. And so one of the ways to do that is to, seek brand-funded or brand-supported partnerships. With brand-supported partnerships, one of the things that the broadcasters can rely on is some certainty of the economics before they need to make it, put the show to air or to commission it or produce it. The trade-off in all of these things, of course, is editorially, how does the show relate to the audience and to the strategy of the channel or the network versus what are the brand partners' needs and how do they come together? But it's a constant tension, right, that you're trying to balance and get right for all parties, for the partners and for the audience. It would seem it's gone to another level, potentially at the moment, in favour of the partners. Whether that rights itself over time, who knows? But I think it's very reflective of where we are in the economic cycle with broadcasting right now and the need to be able to bring more brand-funded content into primetime.
Yeah, very, very interesting, very instructive, and it'll be interesting to see how audiences respond. If they're comfortable with that, then this is a sort of a new economic reality. If they start to turn off, then it starts to kind of become self-defeating. I saw some the most recent Nielsen ratings I saw for 25 to 54 outside of the top 10, which normally holds up reasonably well. We're sort of seeing some numbers in the 30,000, 40,000 range, which is,
wow.
I've never seen that in that area. It's always been above 50, 60,000. And so, I'm not saying that these things are connected, but certainly in terms of the what drives the revenues, if your audiences get that low.
Well, this is the ever decreasing circles, right? That happens. You take money out of a particular area of the business, you then don't get the return on audience, which means you're not getting the return on revenue, and it becomes the snake is eating its own tail. Yeah, and it's really hard to jump out of that. I think everyone will be hoping for, if not a rebound, a stabilisation of the ad market, which allows them to then think about their cost base in a different way, to think about their investments in a different way, and with a more predictable future than what everyone's looking at right now.
Yeah. It's still freaky times out there. Quick comment on Luke Combs, who's a country artist. Who about this time last year played a show at Spark Arena, and I remember when it was announced, people were just absolutely shocked that this artist, who most people had never heard of, who had, I think, at the time had no radio hits, there's certainly still no country station here. You get some spot play on pop stations, but that he could play and sell out Spark. And country has historically been not just a kind of US music, but a regional US music. It's largely the sort of southern states that adopted it, and it had almost no export potential. And he's returning to New Zealand in January, so in a few months away, and they've announced 2 dates at Eden Park. It's just such a mind-melting kind of rise for him as an artist, but also just for the internationalization of country as a genre.
Yeah, it's huge. I've just obviously in the US, it's everywhere at the moment. The People's Choice Country Music Awards coming up, and it's just plastered everywhere. It's just obviously an enormous genre. And, it's so interesting. My daughter, 17 years of age, big country fan, and her friends are big country fans, right? Who would have thought? It's incredible that how big, this genre has become.
Yeah, it's interesting. Millie Olican, who is the VP of International Relations for the Country Music Association, is a New Zealander. I've had her on the fold before. Really, really smart and thoughtful person who's been a big part of the driving of an international strategy for country music. But it does strike me that it's real validation of the fact that country operates quite differently. It is much more of an industry like kiwi fruit or wine growing than other parts of music, which consist of a lot of small fiefdoms that don't necessarily support one another in the same way that country does. And I think that the fact of this rise to, look, he still has to sell the tickets, right? Like, part of me thinks that it might end up being that this is an overreach, but certainly the level of ambition, the fact that it's plausible that it could happen is just an extraordinary thing.
Well, did you see that Twisters movie? I'm not sure if you saw that recently.
I didn't see it, but it performed out the ass at the box office. Had Luke Combs on the soundtrack.
Well, I was going to say that soundtrack is 100% country, right? And I think, you see more and more of that, right? More opportunities to kind of industrialise and democratise country music through, other platforms like theatrical.
Absolutely. Finally, let's talk about your trip and particularly the media you gorged on, and looking at this kind of incredible moment in US politics through that lens.
I guess I should start by saying that I'm glad to be in New Zealand and glad to say that we largely have a fact-based centrist kind of news organisation in the main that doesn't stray too far left or right. I'm not saying we don't have the extremes, we do, but in general we're pretty centrist. So I spent a lot of time, it's I think something like 45 days out from the election in the US. So I spent a lot of time on CNN, on CBS and Fox News trying to watch all of the left and the right and the centre, so to speak. And it was crazy. You wouldn't believe they were telling or reporting on the same story depending on what channel you watch. Just completely polarised views on different issues that are affecting America, Americans, and the politics of America. It is crazy. And one of the kind of, I'm going to say highlight. It's not a highlight. It's completely the wrong word. But I think over here, it's pretty well read now about the cats and dogs comment in Springfield, Ohio, around Trump during the debate, saying that the immigrants were eating the cats and the dogs. Well, as that story played out in the US, I watched an interview with J.D. Vance, who came on and was asked the direct question of whether he made that story up. And he said, yes, I did make that story up, and I will continue to make up stories if I think it's going to focus the opinions of Americans. Now, that's the potential vice president saying he's quite prepared to lie to all Americans to focus their attention. It's just extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a really different political environment, and as much as I think at any given time, it's not like there's a period where everyone looks around and goes, this is all working out well. You're always mad at the opposition, or whatever to your tribe typically, but certainly in terms of the media environment, the kind of level of political discourse and the extent to which, much as we're sort of arguing over things, we're arguing over a single object rather than, completely cross purposes and different realities. So we can be grateful for that.
The other thing that I noticed is just the complete polarization. And so there's almost this tacit kind of approval that you do not speak about politics in America to other people, because if you do, if you're a Democrat, for example, or you hold left-leaning views and you happen to be talking to a Republican and you start talking about your nominee, there is no central debate to be held. People just hold their polls and their views, and it's ugly. And there is no reason entered into it's I am a Democrat or I am a Republican. No common sense or debate to be had. It's quite extraordinary. Whereas one of the things that I enjoy in New Zealand is that we can debate our politics with one another, but it doesn't affect underlying relationships. We might hold views on certain people, but we can still hold a good, strong relationship despite our politics. That seems to be less and less the case in America. And what I also saw was, and whether it's true or not, but certainly the rise in rhetoric around what will happen if Trump doesn't win the election, with the rise of militias and other things, and kind of setting this kind of fertile ground for what could be some bad outcomes in America if he's unsuccessful.
Yeah, it's quite a chilling scene, and as you say, it's sort of month and a half, and we'll sort of be watching the thing live through the cracks in our fingers. Great to have you back, Glenn, and really looking forward to doing this all again in a couple of weeks.
Awesome, thank you.
It's our birthday. This month, the spin-off turns 10, and we wanted to thank you for being part of our story. You're not meant to ask for presents, but if you're not a member, now would be a great time to gift us your support. We cannot overstate how vital support from our readers is, especially as we navigate uncertainty and look at the next 10 years of telling Aotearoa's stories. Donate now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate. Rā whānau kia The Spinoff, and here's to many more.
We started doing a pepeha.
I don't know where I'm from. Yeah, I'm gonna go check with the chef.
Takeout Kids, a coming-of-age documentary series, returns for Season 2. From a Thai restaurant to a dairy to a nail salon, 5 young people balance school and relationships while growing up in their families' shops.
Are you working tomorrow?
I go to school.
Watch Takeout Kids on The Spin-Off today, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. The Spin-Off Podcast Network.